After studying this module, you shall be able to know the various causal explanations of helping behavior in humans, learn the views regarding empathy, altruism relationship and their egoistic alternatives, identify the meaning and differences between pure empathy and egoism and other causes. Evaluate the validity of the implications these theories hold in our day-to-day lives. Introduction. Human behavior is holistically guided by an interdependent nature, and we spend a lot of time in our lives helping others in many different ways. From a small act of helping someone locate an address to volunteering to help victims of natural disasters, we engage in a lot of activities consciously or unconsciously that basically benefit someone else, a friend or stranger for that matter. But in terms of psychology, the question lies in exploring the reasons behind this human nature to even put themselves in danger to help someone else. However, when social psychologists started unfolding the pages of helping behavior in the late 1960s, they didn't ponder over the decision of why people helped, but rather on why people fail to help when we think they should. Historical backdrop. On March 13, 1964, the infamous murder of Kitty Genovese in Kew Gardens neighborhood of Queens, New York, in front of 38 witnesses who didn't come forward for any help, unfolded a whole new lens to the view of helping behavior. Specifically, John Darley and Bibb Latan suggested that once we see ourselves in an emergency situation, we first need to notice that there exists a need, then assess our personal responsibility towards it, and finally see if there is something we can do about it. This decision making is complicated by the air of stress present in emergency situations, the ambiguity and involved threat. It also is influenced by the presence or absence of other bystanders who might influence us to a state of inaction due to diffusion of responsibility where each one thinks that it's the other's job to help. Defining empathy and altruism. Over the past 50 years, however, the focus of helping behavior and its related ideas have changed, and we find under its wraps the processes of empathy and altruism. Empathy is a kind of emotional response to the perceived plight of another person. It is the ability to put oneself in the shoes of another person and feel what he or she does. Rather than mimicking someone else's emotions, it is about having an accurate sense of what she or he might be feeling like. Altruism is when we promote someone else's welfare even at the cost or risk of our own interests. It stands in opposition to being selfish and refers to a specific form of motivation that leads people to engage in behaviors that are aimed at benefiting others. It is a motivational state with the ultimate goal of increasing another's welfare. The likely source of altruistic motivation is empathic concern. Empathic concern refers to another oriented emotional response elicited by and in congruence with the perceived welfare of someone in need. Researchers have come up with considerable evidence suggesting that empathic concern motivates one to engage in altruistic behavior directed towards reducing the empathy-inducing need.
Human behavior is holistically guided by an interdependent nature, and we spend a lot of time in our lives helping others in many different ways. From a small act of helping someone locate an address to volunteering to help victims of natural disasters, we engage in a lot of activity, consciously or unconsciously, that basically benefit someone else, a friend or stranger for that matter. But in terms of psychology, the question lies in exploring the reasons behind this human nature to even put themselves in danger to help someone else. However, when social psychologists started unfolding the pages of helping behavior in the late 1960s, they didn't ponder over the decision of why people helped, but rather on why people fail to help when we think they should. On March 13th, 1964, the infamous murder of Kitty Genovese in Kew Gardens neighborhood of Queens, New York, in front of 38 witnesses who didn't come forward for any help, unfolded a whole new lens to the view of helping behavior. Specifically, John Darley and Bibb Latane suggested that once we see ourselves in an emergency situation, we first need to notice that there exists a need, then assess our personal responsibility towards it, and finally see if there is something we can do about it. This decision making is complicated by the air of stress present in emergency situations, the ambiguity and involved threat. It also is influenced by the presence or absence of other bystanders who might influence us to a state of inaction due to diffusion of responsibility, where each one thinks that it's the other's job to help. Over the past 50 years, however, the focus of helping behavior and its related ideas have changed, and we find under its wraps the processes of empathy and altruism. Empathy is a kind of emotional response to the perceived plight of another person. It is the ability to put oneself in the shoes of another person and feel what she or he does. Rather than mimicking someone else's emotions, it is about having an accurate sense of what she or he might be feeling like. Altruism is when we promote someone else's welfare even at the cost or risk of our own interests. It stands in opposition to being selfish and refers to a specific form of motivation that leads people to engage in behaviors that are aimed at benefiting others. It is a motivational state with the ultimate goal of increasing another's welfare. The likely source of altruistic motivation is empathic concern. Empathic concern refers to another oriented emotional response elicited by and in congruence with the perceived welfare of someone in need. Researchers have come up with considerable evidence suggesting that empathic concern motivates one to engage in altruistic behavior directed towards reducing the empathy reducing need. Whether or not empathy is a part of essential human nature has been a topic long debated. Proponents of universal egoism have to say that everything we do, no matter how noble and beneficial our acts seem, they are ultimately aimed at self benefit. Egoism is the motive to pursue some sort of personal gain or benefit through targeted behavior. This personal benefit can take the form of relieving the negative emotions that an undesirable situation produces in us. Proponents of pure altruism do not deny that the motivation for much of what we do, including much that we do for others, is egoistic. But they claim that at least some of us, to some degree, under some circumstances, are capable of qualitatively different form of motivation, motivation with an ultimate goal of benefiting someone else. So they propose that altruism, if not completely, is a part of basic human nature, one that arises out of empathic emotions like compassion, sympathy, tender-heartedness, and the like. The most frequently mentioned possible source of altruistic motivation is an other oriented emotional reaction elicited in congruence with the perceived welfare of someone else. This reaction has variously been called empathy, sympathy, sympathetic distress, tenderness, and pity or compassion. Knowing the thoughts and feelings of another person. Various researchers have termed knowing another person's internal state, including thoughts and feelings, as empathy. Others have called this cognitive empathy or empathic accuracy. Still others speak of understanding or perceiving accurately, assuming the posture of an observed other or mimicking the neural response. Preston and Duvall put forth the idea that while trying to take the posture of an observed other or trying to feel what the other person goes through, one goes through a state of mimicking the neural response. This not necessarily means imitating the motor behavior, but having similar kind of neural responses. The neural responses become similar because perception and action rely on the same neural circuits. So, as the perceptions become similar, so do the neural response, and thereby one starts to get a better glimpse of the other person's internal states. Coming to feel as another person feels. Feeling the same emotion that another person feels also is a common dictionary definition of empathy, and it is a definition used by some psychologists. Among philosophers, coming to feel as the other person feels is more likely to be called sympathy, intuiting or projecting oneself into another's situations. This state also has been called projective empathy. We try to project ourselves into another's situation and, with the help of intuitive feelings, try to feel as they do, imagining how another is thinking and feeling. WISP called imagining how other is feeling psychological empathy in order to differentiate it from the aesthetic empathy. Stotland spoke of this as a particular form of perspective taking, and imagining him, or more generally, an imagining other perspective, imagining how one would think and feel in the other's place. Adam Smith prosaically referred to this act of imagination as changing places in fancy. Mead sometimes called it role taking and sometimes empathy. In the Purgation tradition, imagining how one would think in the other's place has been called either perspective taking or decentering, being upset by another person's suffering. The state of personal distress evoked by seeing another in distress, to which we just referred, has been given a variety of names. It has been called sympathetic pain, promotive tension, unpleasant arousal occasioned by observation, and empathy, feeling for another person who is suffering. The term empathy or empathic concern refers to an emotion that is other oriented and is congruent with the perceived welfare of someone else. Here, other oriented refers to the focus of the emotion. It is felt for the other. Congruence refers to the valence of the emotion. Positive when the perceived welfare of the other is positive, and negative when the perceived welfare is negative. However, congruence of emotion doesn't imply that the content of what you feel for the other person has to be the same. For example, one might feel sad and sorry for a friend who is scared and upset. Note that all 8 of the empathy concepts we have considered are situation specific. None refers to a general disposition or personality trait. There may well be individual differences in the ability and inclination to experience these various states, but attempts to measure these differences by standard retrospective self report questionnaires seem suspect at best. Daniel Batson, in the year 1991, forwarded the empathy altruism hypothesis on the basis of findings that there are instances in which egotism doesn't hold as explanations to helping behavior. It proposes that empathic concern for a person who needs help produces altruistic motivation, due to which one engages in helping behavior. Empathizing with another person increases the likelihood of helping that person. Proponents of egoistic alternatives, however, disagree and have to say that altruism results only from one of the three categories of empathy inducing egoistic motives, that is, reward seeking, punishment avoidance, and aversive arousal reduction. The advocates of empathy altruism hypotheses do not completely deny the existence of egoistic motives for altruistic behavior, but they put forward that not all helping behavior is a hedonistic expression of human selfishness. Benefits to self are not always the ultimate goal for engaging in prosocial behavior. In fact, they many times are unintended consequences. It has been suggested that it is naive to assume that humans behave in ways that are not self serving, but there is much evidence to suggest that people are prepared to help others even if there are no rewards for such behaviors. Since the Renaissance, the dominating notion has been that altruism is guided by the motive of egotism, and modern scholars hold on to the position that we help others because it profits us to do so. Egotism altruism camp, as they can be called, have to view that no matter how selfless our behavior might seem, but we engage in it only because there are underlying benefits for us, such as social appreciation, material rewards, etc. The egotistical or self benefiting actions that involve altruism can take variant forms, but can be clubbed among three major forms. Aversive arousal reduction. The most frequently proposed egoistic explanation of the empathy helping relationship is aversive arousal reduction. According to this explanation, feeling empathy for someone who is suffering is unpleasant, and empathically aroused individuals help in order to eliminate these empathic feelings that are causing distress. Benefiting the person for whom empathy is felt is simply a means to this self serving end. The experiments testing this against the empathy altruism hypotheses do so by varying the ease of escaping further exposure to a suffering victim without helping. Since it outforwards that empathic arousal is a result of seeing the victim suffering, one can reduce this arousal by either re engaging in helping behavior or by escaping away from the situation altogether. But escaping from the situation doesn't allow one to reach the altruistic goal of relieving the victim's distress. Therefore, the aversive arousal explanation predicts elimination of the empathy helping relationship when escape is easy. Empathy altruism hypothesis does not. Results of experiments testing these competing predictions have consistently supported the empathy altruism hypothesis, not the aversive arousal reduction explanation. The chance for easy escape during an emergency situation reduces the likelihood of helping behavior only for people predominantly experiencing personal distress rather than empathy. Those experiencing a predominance of empathy will help, irrespective of whether or not possibilities of escape are present. These results therefore cast serious doubt on this popular egoistic explanation. A second egoistic explanation claims that people learn through socialization that additional obligation to help, and so additional shame and guilt for failure to help is attendant on feeling empathy for someone in need. As a result, when people feel empathy, they are faced with impending social or self censure beyond any general punishment associated with not helping. When faced with emergency situations, they engage in self talk of what will others think of them if they do not engage in helping behavior, or what perceptions they will hold about themselves. So, in order to escape these feelings of guilt, shame, etc., they engage in altruistic behavior. But here again, experiments have failed to support the egoistic idea and have rather patterned on the empathy altruism hypotheses. Empathy specific reward. The third major egoistic explanation claims that people learn through socialization that special rewards in the form of praise, honor, and pride are attendant on helping a person for whom they feel empathy. As a result, when people feel empathy, they think of these rewards and help out of an egoistic desire to gain them. This form of egoistic explanation has been tested and received no support. But two variations of this explanation have been proposed. Cialdini et al. Proposed that negative state relief explanation, where they suggested that empathy experienced while witnessing another person's suffering is a negative affective state, to relief which the person feeling empathy engages in altruistic or helping behavior. A second variation on an empathy specific reward explanation was proposed by Smith et al., where they proposed that rather than helping to gain the rewards of seeing oneself or being seen by others as a helpful person, empathically aroused individuals help in order to feel joy at the needy individual's relief. Testing the empathy altruism hypothesis and its current status. Daniel Batson and his colleagues have, in a series of experiments, time and again, have tried to test the empathy altruism hypothesis against the three egoistic alternatives. To achieve the ideal research situation, they do not always provide participants with an opportunity to help a person in need. They rather manipulate the level of empathic concern felt for the person in need and some cross cutting variable that determines whether helping is the most effective way to reach the altruistic ultimate goal of removing the other's need and one or more of the possible egoistic ultimate goals. These cross cutting variables do not change the final goals, but change the attractiveness or availability of behavioral routes to different goals. Therefore, each of the variables listed below allows the researchers to make competing empirical predictions from the empathy altruism hypotheses and at least one of the egoistic alternatives. On the probable existence of other sources of altruistic motivation, various propositions have been made, including an altruistic personality, principled moral reasoning, and internalized prosocial values. There exists evidence that these can act as potential sources of prosocial motivation. But whether or not they can be used to explain altruistic motivation is not clear. It may be an instrumental means to the egoistic ultimate goals of maintaining one's positive self concept or avoiding guilt. Collectivism, benefiting another to benefit a group. Collectivism is a motivation to benefit a particular group as a whole. The ultimate goal is not to increase one's own welfare or the welfare of the specific others who are not benefited, but to increase the welfare of the group. Robin Dawes and his colleagues put it succinctly: not me or three, but we. They suggested that collectivist motivation is a product of group identity. However, as with altruism, what looks like collectivism may actually be a subtle form of egoism. Perhaps attention to group welfare is simply an expression of enlightened self interest. Collectivism, benefiting another to benefit a group. The most direct evidence that collectivism is independent of egoism comes from research by Dawes, Van de Krat, and Orbel. They examined the responses of individuals who had been given a choice between allocating money to themselves or to a group. When allocation to oneself maximized individual but not group profit, whereas allocation to the group maximized collective but not the individual profit. Dawes et al. Found that if individuals faced with this dilemma made their allocation after discussing it with other members of the group, they gave more to the group than if they had no prior discussion. Moreover, this effect was specific to the in group with whom the discussion occurred. Allocation to an out group was not enhanced. Based on this research, Dawes et al. Ruled out the two most plausible egoistic explanations for collectivist motivation. They are: A. Enlightened self interest by eliminating the chance for one's behavior to be reciprocated, and B. Socially instilled conscience by creating a norm to share. But to explore this further, deeper and broader research is needed. Principalism, benefiting another to uphold a moral principle. Most moral philosophers do not just argue the importance of prosocial motive over egoism, but they also reject appeals to altruism, especially empathy induced altruism, as they feel that emotions like empathy, sympathy, and compassion are too fickle and too restricted. They also reject appeals to collectivism because group interest is bounded by the limits of the group, and which can therefore nurture harmful behavior towards outgroup members. Therefore, the moral philosophers advocate prosocial motivation with an ultimate goal of upholding universal and impartial moral principles such as justice. This is what has been termed as principalism. The self benefits of upholding a moral principle are conspicuous. One can gain the social and self rewards of being seen and seeing one's social and self punishments of shame and guilt for failing to do the right thing. Alternatively, through internalization or development of moral reasoning principles, may come to be valued in their own right and not simply as instrumental means to self serving ends. Is upholding the principle an ultimate goal, with the ensuring self benefits unintended consequences? If so, then principalism is a fourth type of prosocial motivation, independent of egoism, altruism, and collectivism. Staub and Schwartz have for many years emphasized the importance of values as determinants of prosocial behavior. Batson has proposed a general model that links prosocial values and motives. The value underlying egoism is enhanced personal welfare. The value underlying altruism is the enhanced welfare of one or more individuals as individuals. The value underlying collectivism is enhanced group welfare. And the value underlying principalism is upholding a moral principle. 4 experiments have provided evidence for the predicted link between empathic emotion, a source of altruistic motivation, and valuing another individual's welfare. The other value motive links await test. Concern for another's welfare may be a product of a. A sense of we-ness based on cognitive unit formation or identification with the other's situation. B. The self expanding to incorporate the other. C. Empathic feeling for other who remains distinct from the self. D. The self being redefined at a group level where me and thee become interchangeable part of a self that is we. But not all of these proposals can stand true at one time. What can be concluded is that empathic feelings are not a product of self other merging, but the effect of one's self concept of caring for people, groups, and principles is not, as of now, well understood. It is clear that the empathy altruism relationship has broad theoretical implications. The view of universal egoism, which states that all human behavior is ultimately directed towards self benefit, has long dominated psychology and other social and behavioral sciences. If individuals feeling empathy act, at least in part, with an ultimate goal of increasing the welfare of another, then the assumption of universal egoism must be replaced by a more complex view of motivation that allows for altruism as well as egoism. Such a shift in our view of motivation requires, in turn, a revision of our underlying assumptions about human nature and human potential, in a way that we humans may be more social than we have thought, and that we indeed have the potential to care about others' welfare as well. The empathy altruism relationship forces us to face the question of why empathic feelings exist and the evolutionary functions they serve. The most acceptable and probable answer comes from the explanation that empathic concern evolved as part of the parental instinct among higher mammals, especially humans. Human parental instincts go beyond nursing, providing food, protecting, and keeping the young close. It also involves understanding the desires and feelings of the child, goal directed motives, appraisal based emotions. Tender, empathic feelings permit more flexible and adaptive parental care, which is directed towards enhancing the child's welfare. The human capacity for empathic concern extends well beyond one's own children. People can feel empathic concern for a wide range of targets, including non humans. From an evolutionary perspective, this extension is usually attributed to cognitive generalization, whereby one adopts the target, making it possible to evoke empathic concern and altruistic motivation when the target is in need. Such cognitive generalization may be facilitated by two factors: A. Human cognitive capacity, including symbolic thought, and B. Lack of evolutionary advantage in early human hunter gatherer bands for strict limitation of empathic concern and parental nurturance to offspring. In these bands, those in need were often one's children or close kin, and survival of one's genes was tightly tied to the welfare even of those who were not close kin. The empathy altruism relationship also had a range of practical implications. Since empathic feelings evoke altruistic motivation, people may at times suppress or avoid these feelings. Loss of capacity to feel empathy for clients may be a factor, possibly a central one, in the experience of burnout among case workers in the helping professions. This implies that there may be an egoistic motive to avoid altruistic motivation. On a positive note, however, empathy induced altruism has also been found to improve attitudes towards stigmatized outgroups. At a societal level, experiments have indicated that empathy induced altruism can be used to improve attributes towards stigmatized outgroups. Empathy inductions have been used to improve racial attitudes, as well as attitudes towards people with AIDS, the homeless, and even convicted murderers. In schools, empathy based training has been used to increase mutual care among students. Stephen and Finlay pointed out that the induction of empathic concern is often an explicit component of techniques used in conflict resolution workshops. Participants are encouraged to express their feelings, their hopes and fears, and to imagine the thoughts and feelings of those on the other side of the conflict. These techniques affect perception of the other as a need and adoption of the other's perspective, two conditions that, in combination, have been used to produce empathic concern. Let us summarize what we have learned. Empathy is an other oriented emotion that arises due to and stands in congruence with the emotion felt by someone else. Altruism is when we promote someone else's welfare even at the cost or risk of our own interests. The empathy altruism hypothesis states that feelings of empathy promote altruistic motivation due to which people engage in various helping behavior. However, there are others who propose universal egoism, stating that everything we do, no matter how noble and beneficial our acts seem, they are ultimately aimed at self benefit. Two other probable sources of altruistic motivation have also been brought into light: collectivism, that is, benefiting another to benefit group, and principalism, that is, benefiting another to uphold a moral principle. All these debate on which perspectives hold true bring to light various theoretical and practical implications that the empathy altruism relationship hold. From focusing on the evolutionary roots of altruistic behavior, the implications also seem to play a role in the newfound positive attitude of altruistic behavior towards the marginalized and stereotyped.
Summary: empathy is an other oriented emotion that arises due to and stands in congruence with the emotion felt by someone else. Altruism is when we promote someone else's welfare even at the cost or risk of our own interests. The empathy altruism hypothesis states that feelings of empathy promote altruistic motivation due to which people engage in various helping behaviors. However, there are others who propose universal egoism, stating that everything we do, no matter how noble and beneficial our acts seem, they are ultimately aimed at self benefit. Two other probable sources of altruistic motivation have also been brought into light: collectivism, that is, benefiting another to benefit group, and principalism, that is, benefiting another to uphold a moral principle. All this debate on which perspective holds true brings to light various theoretical and practical implications that the empathy altruism relationship hold. From focusing on the evolutionary roots of altruistic behavior, the implications also seem to play a role in the newfound positive attitude of altruistic behavior towards the marginalized and stereotyped.